Ahoy hoy gang, if this is your first time with us, welcome! And if you're coming from another video, hey, we love to see it and I hope you're doing well. Season 13 is one wild season to go through. It's got really high peaks and really low valleys. Not only do we get one of the most divisive inclusions to the series, but we also just get some of the best American dad yet, which is just baffling over 200 episodes since we started our journey. Here we are in the 13th season of a show that's already been canceled once, and we're still not at some of my favorite episodes of the entire series. So, without further ado, what worked? What failed? There's only one way to find out. Let's lean into Season 13. So this is an interesting start to the season. It's actually a Christmas episode. And not just any Christmas episode, a snot-centric Christmas Hanukkah episode. The episode opens with a recap of what happened in the last Christmas episode, and despite it being a pretty definitive conclusion to the arc, it's just gonna keep on going, baby. Season 13! Woo! Basically, the Smiths are excited to be able to actually celebrate Christmas, and Roger gets upset that they won't appreciate his dance, so he goes to bother Snot with it, where he learns about Hanukkah and how underrepresented it is. Naturally, this means that Roger has to convert to Judaism and become the new Jewish Santa by harnessing the power of the unalive Santa's clothes, and so, yeah. They steal from a corpse and try to push a Roger Hanukkah-centric Christmas. The Smiths have to bring Santa back to life to stop Roger's power trip, and yeah, it basically resets everything. Santa Schmanta is not the best American Dad Christmas episode. However, I think it's one of the best Snot episodes. I know I harp on it again and again, but Curtis Armstrong, like the rest of the cast, really does know what he's doing with his character. The nuance in his delivery this episode feels much more dour. Like it's a painful time of the year for Snot, and at times he doesn't appreciate Roger butting in, especially because he has no idea he's even an alien. But he also likes not being alone and getting more people to celebrate Hanukkah. It's a very interesting dichotomy to explore in Snot, of all characters. Is it a season premiere? No, not really. The next episode is definitely more the proper premiere, but this does do a good enough job of setting the tone for Season 13. Coming in hot with a strong Snot episode, which ironically won't be the last time this happens this season, we're also getting a lot more experimental, and we're steadily inching towards the event horizon that is Rabbit Ears. Santa Schmanta is a perfectly fine 7 out of 10. Alright, now this feels like a season premiere, and what a premiere it is. The episode opens with Francine and Stan watching a special morning mimosa where an unfaithful hamster jumps headfirst into matrimony. Haley tells her mom she needs to get out of the bubble and embrace the real world while she follows a crazed man up the stairs to Roger's conspiracy convention, where I'm pretty sure his disguise is an homage to Richard Langley, a character from the X-Files spin-off series The Lone Gunman. Only the deepest cuts here. But Francine begins questioning everything, and then when she catches Stan being the actual executive producer of Morning Mimosa and has been using it to keep her placated, she goes full-on conspiracy. And as she's throwing random conspiracies out in the middle of her RV during a podcast, she actually lands on a real one of the CIA having toilet cams, and Bullock and the gang have to take her out. They even attempt to take Stan aside to play at Dave & Buster's while they unalive his wife. And yeah, she and Stan find their peace, and it's all sweet as they frame a funeral and make a conspiracy of their own. Oh, the B story? You want me to actually talk about the B story? You think this conspiratorial juggernaut of an episode was just going to have a super dominant A story that made everything else just feel inadequate, right? Wrong. The B story of this episode may very well be the best of the season. Snot's mom is dating Dell, who invites the two to move in with him at the Get Ready For It Chesterbrook townhouses. Del is actually played by Twin Peaks' Kyle MacLachlan, and Del, being such a cool guy, gives Snot his very own basement room to trick out how he wants. It's a phenomenal Snot and Steve bit featuring in one of his funniest roles yet, Klaus. This is it. This is when Klaus really comes into his own as just this insane wild card. He tricks out the basement to get girls and then ends up accidentally seducing Snot's mom, ruining the whole thing. Like, I know that sounds like nothing. I know that sounds like just the usual return to normal, but it's how Klaus just sort of pushes through and has such a reverence for the Chesterbrook townhouses. It's just, it's amazing how you can put so much personality into a fish. I don't know, Paranoid Frandroid is very much greater than the sum of its stories. Both stories gel so well together and feel so natural that it is just kind of a perfect TBS era episode. It's a 10 out of 10 episode, no question, and should be essential viewing for any new fan. When the family goes to Law & Order Fest, Haley bonds with Ice-T, and the family shares their favorite moments, as Stan and Francine share a stolen clarinet. The bulk of the episode is about Stan joining the census and counting the people of America, and being disgusted when he realizes that his idealized job is literally one that anyone can do. He and Haley begin to compete over who can count more people, and yeah, it's a whole thing. It all culminates in Stan getting kidnapped by a serial skin suit maker, and Haley then has to hunt him down and learn about each other's strengths and the strength of Haley and Ice-T's relationship. The B story follows Steve and the boys helping Klaus become a photographer, and I think this might be the first appearance of Jurgen as an actual, built character, who definitely leaves a lasting impression. And yeah, it's just Klaus going off the deep end and getting obsessed again. Unlike Paranoid Frandroid, this feels like they took Klaus just a little too far. It feels unnecessary to pivot this hard into him. Like, the interaction with Steve and the gang is funny, sure, but I feel like this story has been done before and done better with other characters. Overall, The Census of the Lambs is one of the stronger Haley and Stan episodes recently. Having Haley try and find Stan and using her detective skills to find him is great and really shows how they've let her grow as a character instead of just being a constant stoner. The Census of the Lambs is an excellent tempo-maintaining episode. You never feel like it's going too far out there and it's just kind of there. It's got solid jokes, plenty of okay elements, and I'd be very surprised if it was anyone's favorite episode. So, despite the actual cameo by Ice-T, Census of the Lambs is a 6 out of 10. I'm just gonna be totally upfront with you, gang. Season 13 is definitely the first season where you start to feel the wave. Some episodes are really, really good, and some episodes you're just gonna totally forget. There's a couple just absolutely vapid episodes this season, and Shell Game isn't one of them. Boom! That's right, Shell Game is next level daddage. It's episodes like Shell Game that make you think the writers know they put out filler episodes so people can have some breathing room before getting slapped in the face with just quality. Steve and Roger are bird-watching buddies checking out all the assorted bird breeds of Langley when they catch the Commodore stealing an egg from a nest and running off to collect it with other egg-obsessed individuals. The Commodore is played by Frank Langella. Skeletor in Masters of the Universe, Frank Langella. Even if the quality of some episodes may waver, the star power is still there and shining through. I mean, talk about an absolutely stacked season. And they're to the benefit of one of the most predictable yet satisfying episodes of the show. Steve and Roger discover that the collectors have developed something called Egg Madness, where they want to collect and harvest eggs. Roger proceeds to get the aforementioned Egg Madness and fights to get the Commodore's attention. Steve then has to fight Roger in a back-and-forth egg napping to keep their precious bird hobby safe. All of this, mind you, is just the A story. The B story is, again, remember, we've talked about this before, usually a standard story with an absurd twist. This time, the family tries a zesty version of spaghetti sauce and go full-blown Italian. Steve's life flashes before his eyes later in the episode, and it's just like a black and white mob movie. The A and B stories are so excellently interwoven that they just keep building off of each other again and again and again. The writing is so sharp and really hangs on you knowing who these characters are to each other. There's no cutaways to that time they did thing with famous celebrity of time period. They have to carry these stories on their own shoulders. And seeing how each character transforms into this just caricature of an Italian version of themselves is just beautiful. My heart, she is full. This would also be one of the first times Laurie Metcalf would guest star as Elizabeth Hadley, a somewhat recurring character. Shell Game is a masterpiece. 10 out of 10. One of the best episodes of the season. The story is predictable so you can lean back and just enjoy fantastic jokes and get wrapped up in the tempo they're trying to maintain as we lead directly into... another Stan and Haley episode. Woot woot. Like, other than a Christmas special, she's gotten the A story 50% of the time of the season already, and looking at the season as a whole, it feels like they front-ended all the Haley episodes. Once we get through this little block, she really isn't in the A stories anymore for the rest of the season. After a mural is desecrated and takes away from some sick Steve backseat shuffling, Stan is determined to restore a mural and show Haley that she lacks lointegrity. That's it. That's the whole A story. We have seen it time and time again. Even seeing it back in episodes like The Devil Wears a Lapel Pin, or even going back to something like Stanny Get Your Gun. It's just classic Stan versus Haley shenanigans. They feud, Haley gets a face swap, they make up at the end, and Klaus avenges his greatest idea, Goof McDoof. All gold, all solid, excellent writing makes an otherwise predictable plot feel alive, just like in Shell Game. The B story, however, is literally just Whiplash, the hit 2014 movie, but instead of drums, it's clowns. Yeah! Steve goes to clown school and gets whiplashed by Roger. They do a whiplash. We're really just sort of leaning into the absurdity at this point. Sure, there's absolutely a clown school where Steve can try and be a clown. Sure, yeah, of course, Haley can just face swap and come up with an intricate revenge scheme of blowing up a wall. Sure, Thomas Lennon starts showing up pretty frequently this season as, just some guy, shows up in over like 15 episodes, still doesn't have a name. Who is this dude? What's going on? They gave the Bazooka Sharks guy a name. What's going on with him? You just shrug it off because you can trust American Dad to play within the boundaries it's set up. Comedy, much like being a clown, is all about knowing your audience. American Dad knows its audience is smart enough to not need their hand held. Perfect example, this episode came out in 2018. Now, sure, Whiplash is a critical darling and a film everyone should see at least once, but they weren't trying to capitalize on the fame of Whiplash or anything at this point. The movie had been out for 4 years already. And so, if they're just gonna do a Whiplash, they need to make sure it's the sharpest parody it can be, and I gotta say, it really delivers. If you've never seen the movie, you still get a funny Steve and Roger feud, but if you have, you get to the point you can see they recreated some shots almost perfectly. Like, that attention to detail just isn't appreciated enough. They could have taken an easy way out, but they stuck to it, and I don't know, the episode is a 10 out of 10 that only gets better with time. Haley's got a job at SubHub. When delivering subs at the CIA, she sees the dismal working conditions they have to operate in and encourages them all to strike as she stands up to Bullock. Yada yada yada, Stan appreciates that maybe she's smarter than she looks and having better working conditions is good. Wow, such an original story. I think the biggest things to take away from it, though, are unlike Muriel, where he's constantly bashing her for low integrity, there are moments in this episode where he just talks to Haley. They're still able to be civil and normal around each other, even if they may be feuding in the story, and I do really love that. They're father and daughter. He's always going to care about her, and with this being the last Haley-centric episode for a minute, hey, I think it's a pretty decent one to go out on. Patrick Stewart's delivery as Bullock this episode is actually really great, and I love that he still seems to be having fun with the character. I mean, at the time of recording this, he's been in over 100 episodes of American Dad, which on its own is a massive milestone, but the fact that he's still trying just celebrates his talent as an actor. I mean, this is the second longest thing he's been a part of, other than, Star Trek, which is monumental in his career. The B story of the episode is Steve, Francine, Roger, and Klaus watching Breaking Bad in reverse and going on a mystical reverso treasure hunt to find Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, who's played by, get this, are you ready? Vince Gilligan. Only the most shocking revelations from my fellow dadders out there. You gotta strike for your right as an episode that, if it happened on Fox, it would have probably been celebrated as one of the funniest episodes of that season. Here it just feels like it's following up a lot of solid acts, and while it's fine, it just doesn't do a ton new. It's comfortable in how familiar it is. It's a good, casual 7 out of 10 that you never get tired of catching here or there on Adult Swim. Now, the episode is called Klaustastrophe.tv. What do you think an episode called Klaustastrophe TV would be about? Did you think it would be about Stan discovering his abandonment issues stem from when the Harlem Globetrotters kicked him out of their summer camp when he was just a kid? Did you think that? Would any sane human being make that connection? But yeah, that's the A story. Stan literally abandoned Steve to find out why the Harlem Globetrotters didn't want him anymore. And then he finds out that it was because Jack had abandoned him and they just took him along on the road. They didn't have a camp. They just wanted to take care of the kid and make sure he was okay. And then Stan just had to grow up and deal with that. He had to grow up being abandoned by everyone because they couldn't tell him the truth that his dad was a horrible person. That's the A story. The A story is how the Globetrotters saved Stan. The B story has Klaus posting all the family slip-ups as epic fails on the internet. They try and stage the pranks to make them more popular, and it just fails time and time again. I'm gonna be honest with you. I really love King of the Hill and everything that it does. It really is just good slice-of-life Americana. And one of the B stories of the later seasons, they try and catch a hat blowing off of Bill's head and onto Khan's. They even stage it with Peggy's help, and it's just understandably horrible. I bring it up because every time I see this B story, that's all I can think of. Just this little stick carrying a cowboy hat over to Khan. The way Klaus cranks up the intensity is fun, but overall, I don't know. Between the weird, awkward resolution of Stan's story and Klaustastrophe just sort of being there, this episode just doesn't do it for me. It's not bad, and I'm sure someone out there really enjoys it. And if you do, hey, more power to you. There are things to appreciate about it. But in my book, this is probably like a 5 out of 10. There's a full moon out at the time I'm recording this, and it makes you feel more magical, more enchanted, as you appreciate one of the best episodes of American Dad this season. Sometimes you have an episode that just, okay. The first time I watched this episode, I thought it was just a dumb subversion of your expectations and predictable to a fault. But the more I watched it, the more I realized how cleverly written it is. I have shown this episode to people and gotten to the Jeff scene and asked if they even noticed if he was there. He was, but the same thing happened to them that happens to you as a viewer. Your brain is tricked. You're forced to slow down and pay attention. For a show like American Dad to almost forcibly pull your attention in is a really difficult and rare feat to accomplish. I love this episode, and it's because I love it so much, I don't want to talk too much about its plot. I don't want to give away what happens. Even if you already know, even if it's not a surprise to you, let me have this. Death by Dinner Party is a perfect self-contained narrative that builds on what you know about these characters. But also, if you knew nothing about them, they'd all feel natural, especially, and I can't emphasize enough, the Colonel. I mean, I'm so glad a character like the Colonel is finally getting the love he deserves. Everyone loves the Colonel. Remember in my Season 1 review when I talked about how the Colonel saved Stan while jumping that sand dune? I'm just saying, if you go back and watch the Season 1 video, it might probably be there. Death by Dinner Party is fantastic. It's a 10 out of 10 that no matter how you approach it is just good television. I mean, it's just the best. And you want to know the messed up part? I'm still torn on what the best episode of this season is, because there's just so many of these high-class episodes. Like when I say it's a season of peaks and valleys, there's some very high peaks and sometimes some somewhat deep valleys. This is a solid episode that every dad fan should seek out on their own. This murder mystery is downright magical. Stan tells really long stories. There, that's it. That's the whole A story. Goodbye, everybody. No, Stan teaches a course at the CIA Academy since Bullock can't as he's going on a retreat, and instead of teaching the kids, he just tells them his long, never-ending stories that his family can't stand. They get captured, and he has to admit he doesn't always know what he's talking about. The Dean is actually played by J.K. Simmons, which is funny on a lot of levels, especially considering they did a Whiplash parody earlier in the season. You know, the movie he was nominated for, like, all the awards for. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some good Roger bits in this episode where he's an overbearing mother, and there's some good Bullock yucks, oh yes there are, but this episode is all about the B story. The B story that I would argue perfectly personifies what new Klaus is. Klaus gets discovered as a hype man at a 7-Eleven and starts the meteoric rise to stardom, and even gets his own music video that I'm just gonna call Nutri-Grain Bar and a Mountain Dew. And if you've seen the episode, you sang that part. I know you did. You can't hide from me. I know you. But if you watch the music video, if you share it with people, and then you just sit them down and tell them to describe Klaus, you have a perfect understanding of the kind of character he is. This is a realization of his new identity. Next season, we'll get the materialization of Klaus's boys and his next ascension to godhood. But for now, this is an incredible taste of the direction they're taking him. Like, if the A story was on its own, easily it's just like a 4 out of 10 for me and a 5 out of 10 under the most just bare critical lens. But if you add in the Klaus parts, oh, you've got a 6, my dude, a 6+ even. See, numbers are meaningless. I don't know why I still rate episodes. Maybe I'll stop, maybe I'll keep going. Maybe I'll double down, make it 1 out of 100, who knows? Listen to your heart. Do you hear that beat? That's a rapping goldfish. Love it. Love everything about this episode. Watch it over and over and appreciate exactly what's happening. This may not be a fantastic, amazing, awe-inspiring episode, but what it does for Klaus is monumental. What it's setting up further down the road, it needs to exist. This episode needs to be here. I promise you, if you trust me, if you just come along on this journey with me, you will watch Klaus transform before your very eyes. This is not a character that was forgotten. This is a character that is celebrated for being the weirdest German fish imaginable. Stan thinks that a bullet train would help with the traffic congestion that plagues the Bazooka Shark Stadium. He tries to propose it to the mayor, who laughs him out of the office, and Stan decides to run against him while Francine communes with the rats. I know on paper this seems really confusing, and it is. There is no B story. This is just kind of the whole thing. Francine just sort of losing her mind, communing with rats and getting them to turn into jackets for her, or doing all kinds of different poses. It's weird, gang. It's really weird. This is Stan being a political puppet of Rogers so that he can get an Urban Outfitters to open in Langley. There's this huge power play where they literally take over the city and run it like a police state, all to get an Urban Outfitters. It almost feels like a South Park reference. It feels like something that South Park had done before. And I really wish there was more I could say about the episode, but that's really it at its most bare core. You can feel the beats of the episode and you know exactly where you're going to be at each timestamp, to the point it feels like you've seen the episode before when you're watching it for the very first time. I don't dislike the episode. It just feels ephemeral to me. Like it's almost a fever dream you swear was a real episode of American Dad that, in fact, is an actual episode. I think it's probably a divisive episode, but I personally like what it does. I know what's going to happen, and I still get solid jokes and a decent enough story. Plus, we get President Garfield as the mayor of Langley now, so, you know, that's neat. We also got the return of Sky Crooner, which, I don't know, I kind of jump on with Stan's just absolute love of Sky Crooner. He's grown on me. He has grown on me so much. I love Sky Crooner. Overall, Railroaded is a very okay, foggy 7 out of 10. You know what? It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've said this with such confidence. Skip this episode. You don't need to watch it. I will say Noelle Wells does a fantastic job playing Shannon, and I really wish she was shown in other episodes, but alas, here is her episode. The episode where Stan and Steve join a celibacy group with a bunch of dads and their daughters, and the dads get swords, and Stan's enchanted by it because swords, and I do not like this episode. It just doesn't do anything for me. I've tried time and time again to give it an honest watch through, and it gives me nothing. It sparks no joy. And it's not like the B story is bad or awkward or anything. The family builds a water slide. That's great. It's got some funny bits, but then it yanks you right back into the celibacy club. Honestly, give me the family building a water slide as the A story. And I will say this, I love Craig Robinson. I've loved him ever since I was a kid, and I love whenever he shows up. I get excited when I hear his voice because I know I'm in for a treat. He was one of the greatest parts of Eastbound and Down and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, no question. And I want him to have a long and successful career. I have no idea why they got him to play Agent Turlington when I'm guessing they couldn't get Forrest Whitaker. If he just wanted to play the character, hey, awesome. It just kind of feels off. I know Turlington is the definition of a fringe character, but he's got a special place in my heart, and I just don't know why they didn't just have him be a different agent. The best way to describe the episode, I think, is complicated. It's like they knew you had a Purity Pledge-laced A story and tried to get you through it with a water slide. I did like the Shannon and Steve moments, and I like that Steve grew as a character, but it just feels like Stan regressed back. I love dumb Stan a lot of the time. This isn't one of those times. And even this, with all of its flaws, is still like a 4 out of 10. It still has some iota of value in the grand scheme of things. Episodes like My Purity Ball and Chain exist to make me appreciate episodes like Shell Game more. While Roger and Steve have a sleepover, they play Oregon Trail and name the family after their family. And so, as Roger watches them lose over and over, he begins to realize he's going to outlive the Smiths and decides to fake his own death and go off to be a loner. A renegade. A solemn hero riding from town to town on his motorcycle, ready to bring some outlaw justice. After he fakes his death, the family all grieve in their own ways and begin to spiral until Steve discovers he's still alive and they go to find him. When they're reunited, he has the family's brains beamed into the computer and digitized so they could live forever. Doesn't that feel like such a sharp pivot? One minute he's a renegade, the next the family's back to normal and struggling to clear Oregon Trail to print a certificate and make their way home. It feels like two very different episodes were stitched together in the middle. It just feels so disjointed. What doesn't feel disjointed is the fantastic B story about Klaus running a bodega out of the attic. I love this B story. I apologize for nothing, and if you don't like it, the episode just isn't for you, but the Klaus parts are great. Again, this season is about evolving Klaus. This season keeps elevating him and bringing him up. The fish is certified to put Boar's Head back in his deli. He has earned this. To have something like this after the Neverending Stories is just fantastic. It shows how much more weight Klaus can carry as a character. They've given him more and more autonomy and just assumed things he can do, and he's flourished as a character in the show that's had probably the most dramatic development. Remember Season 1 Klaus? Do you think he could run a bodega? It may be small, but there's growth in these shows even if you don't realize it at first. Klaus has come into his own and become such an integral family member that I dare say the B story is the only thing that keeps me hanging on all the way to the end of the episode. OreTron Trail is a 6 out of 10. Darcy Carden, Busy Phillips, and Chelsea Peretti guest star in this episode. Now that we have the positives out of the way, let's really dive in. It's a Francine and Steve episode where Francine becomes a guidance counselor to try and get the girls to stop bullying Steve, even though Steve doesn't care and just keeps kind of doing his own thing. The B story is Jeff breaking down after losing his hat to the point that he is sobbing unconsolably in the shower. The joke to the B story is that it isn't a joke and he's really melting down over losing his hat. That's it. That's the joke. Hee hee ho ho. I want to say this is a skippable episode, but honestly, you can watch it and walk away feeling like you didn't see anything for 20 minutes. Where Railroaded felt strange and yet familiar and didn't have this tangible reason it was good or bad, Me and Francine is just empty. It's a nothing episode. Steve is going to be the best little Steve he can be, and Francine's desperate attempts to be popular are honestly weird to see compared to what we've seen in the past with Stan. It feels like it would have worked better as a Stan and Steve episode instead, but I mean, I get it. I really want to have something positive to say about the episode, but it really is a struggle. Me and Francine is just kind of there. It doesn't do anything extra, and sure, you could argue that back in Now and Gwen, it showed that Francine was a nerd and wanted to be popular, but for what? For what cause? You can say that there were previous examples, sure, fine, but for this? For her to be a counselor, and this is what we're getting? I don't know. The episode as a whole is like a 4 out of 10 that just sort of meanders along. Roger wakes up and has to take care of the entire city as he hops from persona to persona to keep the peace. He and Stan then begin to hang out less, and Stan thinks that what Roger does is nonsense and won't matter in the long run. Eventually, Roger gets a giant growth on his head and has to be out of commission, so it's up to Stan to take on his personas and keep Langley going, and he manages to screw it all up even worse and causes chaos in the streets after failing to get roller skates fixed. And so he brings out Ricky Spanish once again to try and, I guess, use chaos to make everything make sense again. And there's only one force that can stop this mad lad full of Ricky Spanish power. It can only be stopped by everyone's new favorite wacky family sidekick, Rogu. He's Roger's homunculus, and he's one rude dude with attitude, the Scrappy-Doo of American Dad, both a caricature of the role and a beloved member filling it. Rogu is complicated. A lot of people justifiably can't stand him, and an equally vocal group absolutely adore how grotesque and weird he is. At first, I was hesitant about Rogu, but I will say this. His introduction is so smooth it feels beyond natural. He is maybe briefly shown or mentioned in the rest of the season 1 or 2 times. He doesn't get prominent parts of stories until next season, and I think that's brilliant. It gives the viewer time to digest the idea of Rogu while still hitting him with quality American Dad. Like, there's an entire B story about Steve dealing with taking PEDs for his choir class, and he ends up scatting up a storm as he tweaks out so that Principal Lewis can win yet another award. I didn't even talk about that. It's great. It's a phenomenal Steve B story, but it's all wrapped up in this Roger celebration. Persona Assistant is a wonderful celebration of all of Roger's personas, and a great introduction to everyone's favorite talking tumor, Rogu. Persona Assistant is a 9 out of 10. Francine is a quitter. She never sticks to anything. The family starts mocking her for it, and she decides to stick to weightlifting until she becomes a professional bodybuilder. The B story has Klaus saying that he invented the high five, and that famed baseball player Dusty Baker, played by the absolutely legendary Gary Anthony Williams, is a liar and decides to confront him about it. This episode can best be described as grotesque yet realized. Stan and Roger become bodybuilders to compete against Francine and end up putting her in the hospital. Klaus meets up with Dusty, and Dusty reveals he wants to steal everything from Klaus, including his ability to swim and breathe underwater. Francine puts on a one-woman show about quitting and giving up, while Stan goads her on to keep fighting and come back to him as she deals with being in a coma. You have these freakishly disfigured muscle bods, but on the inside, they're just two people who genuinely love each other, and Stan just wants to appreciate his wife for who she is. And in the B story, you have a famous baseball player drowning because he so desperately wanted to be like the man that invented the high five. Klaus, the fish. Like, sure, it's all jokes and it's all played up to be a gas, but there's a long-form payoff in this episode. I promise I'm not trying to dig too deep, but there's actual morals to the story compared to, say, Shell Game or Railroaded. There's a spirit to One Woman Swole, and it really is a solid episode. Unfortunately for this episode, it would be overshadowed by the absolute Everest of content we get to dig through. One Woman Swole is a bulging 7 out of 10, and a great end piece of a filet roast of maximum quality. It really does have a good charm to it, and I will say the introduction of Francine's partner really is funny. I did like him. I thought he was great. Remember in the last review when I said it was a filet piece of maximum quality? Well, I did a food thing because this episode is about a food guy. When Jeff gets a job at a pizzeria, he runs into Guy Fieri, who wants him to join up with his boys. Jeff then becomes an honorary member of Guy's crew and is driven around until he's ultimately chosen to become the next Guy Fieri and gets possessed by the demon of frosted tips and flavorful diner food annihilation. The B story has Klaus and Roger pretending to be valets to pick up chicks with a weird cosmic voiceover by Steve where his thoughts echo across the sky. Yeah, this is an episode. Make no mistake, Flavortown is a straight 10 out of 10. It misses no notes, and I love that Jeff is front and center in the A story, and having Stan have to slay the demon Guy Fieri is just good entertainment. I mean, when he presents him with his dish just to be refused, constantly trying to get the gaze of the diners, drive-ins, and dives demon and earn his praise, it makes my heart so full. I only wish they had actually gotten Guy Fieri. Not to say that I believe it's Scott Grimes doing the impression of him. Not that it's not good. I like my jokes just a wee bit more meta. But that is nitpicking of the nth degree. The A and B stories are this perfectly interwoven combination of just weird, surreal scenarios. And honestly, I think that elevates the episode as a whole by having these cutaways just be more and more aggressive with how far they're willing to go. Sure, it has elements of Stan learning to respect who his son-in-law is, but also it has a demon Guy Fieri. One element kind of overshadows the other. It's a phenomenal episode that shines because it basks in the absurdity of its premise. Halliburton. I mean, howdy, y'all. What a special Halliburton episode this is. We open with a tale of the great old Ulysses sung to us as the family goes to the lake for a father-son competition. Snot and Tuttle show up and share their sleepless in Seattle story about how they decided to do the father-son competition together, even getting guest star Rosie O'Donnell yet again for this little flashback. This episode is a lot, because it's about 4 different stories all going in wildly different directions, just cut from one after another, and then Halliburton, and yeah, there's a lot here. Steve tries to sabotage Tuttle and Snot so he and Stan win. Francine and Haley ascend from their mortal planes by getting sun poisoning. Roger pretends to be a biking instructor even though he can't ride a bike, and gets a song after him as well. And Klaus gets swallowed by old Ulysses, and that's a whole thing they show off too. There's an almost frantic energy to the episode, hopping from story to story to story, and it really does feel like a showcase of an average lakeside Smith vacation. The Legend of Old Ulysses is a celebration of what a change in scenery can do for an episode. It feels fresh and the writing is fantastic. It's another 10 out of 10 just bizarre episode. And I didn't even talk about the special Monster Energy drink, which is a whole thing on its own. It's a great episode. You may not know what's going on in the beginning, but by the end, you will be absolutely grooving. And it knows how absurd it can go. The Halliburton parts are just absolutely next level. The episode is great. The musical numbers are fantastic. The episode has earned its part of one of the greatest TBS era seasons yet. At a special get-together for Stews and Views, Klaus discovers that Roger and Steve were twin child actors. Roger, missing the acting world that they had to leave because Steve had to start school, and resents the fact that he didn't get to realize his dream. So Steve decides to give acting another shot with Roger, and they go out to the twin agency to make it big. The talent agent being played by the just next level talent of Jason Mantzoukas. The man made close enough work, that's all I'm saying. Lo and behold, Roger can't act. So Steve gets roles, Roger resents him, they make up, you've seen it, and the payoff at the amusement park is arguably more over the top than Cops and Roger. I mean, it's intense, but that end scene with his stomach, I think, pushes it to the peak of absurdity and actually makes it all come together in the end. It definitely feels like a roller coaster story where it just slowly keeps escalating itself and then it's just a straight shot down to a return to normal. It's been a minute since we had a proper Steve and Roger A story, so it's a great thing to see. And overall, it's an expected plot because it's just littered with high quality jokes. Man, sometimes it's great to not have to talk about a B story and just focus on something quality. Oh, what? What's that? There is a B story? Oh, it's the family getting a credit card at Spencer's Gifts for Stan getting hit by the president of Spencer's Gifts and they get addicted to the novelties? Well, that is so fun. Where the Steve and Roger story knows how to keep escalating to a solid payoff, the B story just goes off of wacky imagery and hopes you just get the gag that it's all just dumb. I get it. I don't know. It's not for me. Twinanigans is brought down by its B story, but even then the B story does have some solid jokes to it. All in all things considered, still an 8 out of 10. Roger and Steve are going to an all-girls boarding school thanks to a very specific loophole in the rules that allows them to do that. Now they have to make it through boarding school with their wacky new friends in the brand new American Dad spin-off, Top of the Steve. Meanwhile, Stan is visited by all kinds of wacky new move-ins to keep the show fresh and upbeat. We even get the return of Stephen Fry to the show. And so, yeah, Steve and Roger have to escape Steve's new sitcom and find a way home. The episode is a great parody of 80s and 90s sitcoms. It's willing to go all in on the references and know that people will get it with just the tropes, which I know sounds pretty simple, but think about it. American Dad trusts its audience to notice patterns and understand the idea of tropes. Though small, there is a bar of entry to the show, and I think that needs to be appreciated more. Unlike, say, just going, oh, it's like Saved by the Bell. This character is just like Screech. You actually have to acknowledge that tropes exist. You have to be aware that, oh, they fill this role. This character is serving this purpose. It's very minute, but it's very important. They are incredibly creative, even in the 13th season, when they're willing to take a chance on an episode like this. Here we have Steve literally escaping a sitcom. An idea that's been done tons of times, but this one still somehow feels fresh. Sure, the best ones of this example are usually self-aware, but it's the absurdity of this episode that absolutely saves it. They double down, adding on tropes on tropes on tropes, until it feels like it's almost overwhelmingly sitcom, and that in and of itself is the point. Top of the Steve is a 10 out of 10, and unfortunately, probably the end of the highs for the season. Sorry about that, we're kinda gonna go into a bit of a dry spell. Stan gets a security system after the Mamaris get assaulted in their home. To prove the need for the security system, he and his buddies attack the family and horrifically traumatize Francine, who wants the whole house on lockdown. Steve and Haley share a classic gruff, and he can't believe how she just breezes through everything when she just doesn't seem to care. He starts to adapt her style and ultimately gets caught trying to cheat. It's okay, I guess. It's fine. Francine's security system puts the house on lockdown and determines that Stan is a threat to her and her safety. And yet Francine is afraid of losing Stan. That's it. She helps shut down the system, and that's the episode. I can't wrap my head around it. Like, why would Stan terrorize the family like this? And you can go, oh, that's Stan. Stan always does the wacky shenanigans like that. Of course, but it goes so hard. It goes so overboard for seemingly no reason. It's confusing. It works, don't get me wrong. Kinda, I guess. No, not really. This episode feels stagnant. I will say the B story with Steve and Haley is a little bit better, just due to the absurdity of Groff Community College. Groff has taken on an identity all its own, and seeing the professors being kind of just idiots really works. It's something that we'll see developed even more in the next season, but this is an excellent example of a B story adding world building to an otherwise okay event. Funny-ish Games is just kind of forgettable, other than one incredible hardware store scene that I will not spoil for anyone. Otherwise, it would be a skip it, but this hardware scene sells it all. It doesn't do anything to really make itself stand out, and overall, it kind of feels like what people that don't like American Dad think American Dad is. Funny-ish Games is a 4 out of 10. Haley starts to get paranoid when Jeff has a successful career as a dog racer, so Haley teams up with Roger to beat Jeff and Flea Biscuit. Stan and Francine become royalty of the dog racing track. Huge shout out to John Viner as the track announcer. You probably recognize his voice from one of the 300 plus episodes of Family Guy he shows up in, but still, it's nice to hear him. It's not the first time he's been in the show, but it's always great to hear him pop up. Tuttle is also a breakout character that absolutely shines as another announcer for the episode. Steve takes the time that the family is at the track to have some much needed naked time in the house and begins to party with his newfound nude solitude. Flea Biscuit is the mundane crank to 100. It's what happens when you keep pushing just the absolutely everyday to their peak weirdness. Have Stan and Francine fall deeper in love as they become trashy dog track royalty. Have Haley use Roger as a dog to beat her husband so she isn't the dud of their relationship. It's supposed to be over the top. It's supposed to do all these things, and then it just kind of doesn't. It's not bad, it's just not great either. It's the weakest Haley episode of the season, and honestly, it's a close race between it and Funny-ish Games for worst episode of the season. Honestly, thinking back though, me and Francine might clear both of them. Mean Francine might very well be the worst episode of this season, because unlike Mean Francine, Flea Biscuit at least tries. There's at least something it's trying to do that it fails at. I'll respect a show for trying an idea over a show completely content with not having a single original thought. Here's looking at you, Hoops. Flea Biscuit may be a 4 or 5 out of 10, but it shows they still aren't afraid to go all the way if it gets the audience to be so shocked they laugh. Where Family Guy chases trends, American Dad gets to experiment. It just so happens that not every experiment is a success. When Barry points out Stan and Francine's bickering as a problem, they decide to fix it so they can have a perfect relationship. Meanwhile, Haley, Steve, Klaus, and Roger come up with a new jingle for Pizza Overlord, and when they win and Roger's approached to make a jingle for a small mom-and-pop shop, the power goes straight to his head. Again, that's Roger. The pop of that shop is actually played by J.K. Simmons, making his second guest star appearance in one season. We also get Andy Richter back as Delmonico, Kate Walsh and Craig Robinson playing Craig Robinson. Star-studded season finale here, folks. Anyway, Stan and Francine discover that if they're put in dangerous situations where they have to fight to survive, they aren't fighting each other, and that may be a way to mend their relationship. They keep throwing themselves into more and more dangerous situations to show they love one another until they eventually go into a cave and find underground monsters. However, when they see the underground monsters loving in their own way, they realize that each relationship is different and that what they have isn't perfect for everyone, but it is perfect for them. I don't know, it's a great message, don't get me wrong, but it's to the credit of an otherwise meh episode. As far as season finales go, it's definitely not the best, and I only say it's not the worst because Seizure Suit Stanny exists. The Future is Borax is a 5 out of 10 that is a struggling pulling of the curtain on an otherwise mostly stellar season. Looking back at everything, this isn't a horrible conclusion by any means, but it just, in comparison to the highs, this episode almost feels a smidge undercooked. If they had gone back to it, if they had polished up some of the jokes, it might have gotten better. I don't know. It doesn't feel right. I'm glad that they stand up for themselves against Barry, but otherwise, the episode is just kind of eh. And there we have it, Season 13! So sorry on the wait for this video, but I promise the script for Season 14 is already in progress. What were your most favorite episodes of the season? Least favorite? Anything you think I was wrong on? Right on? Let me know in the comments below. And like always, if you like what you see, like, comment, and subscribe, and tell your friends we're out here. Season 13 is a mixed bag, but when the episodes shine, they really show a series that has matured over its almost 20-year lifespan. We got the introduction of Rogu and Subhub, we got to see Shell Game, and with episodes like Top of the Steve and Death by Dinner Party, or even The Legend of Old Ulysses pushing the boundary of what a traditional episode is, you can see the writers are still having fun. Season 14 is just another mixed bag, but in that bag is some of the most experimental, high-quality content the show has ever put out. I'm so excited to talk about it, and I hope you stick around to check it out. And if you haven't, make sure to check out my Venture Brothers retrospective. And don't worry, I'm already hard at work mapping out what the next series is I'm gonna talk about. And like always, stay strong, keep fighting, and know that I believe in you. It will always get darker before the dawn. You will be able to get through what you're going through now. And it's gonna be so fresh and so clean when we talk about Season 14. Goodbye, everybody. I'll see you next time.